My parents told me not to come home for Christmas, so I built $1 million company and cut them off for good. 6 days before Christmas, while my team wrapped up the final quarter, I got a call from my father that hit like a sucker punch. He didn't ask how I was doing, didn't say anything about the holidays, just dove right in with a tone colder than the snowstorm outside my office window. "Travis," he said, "maybe it's best if you don't come home this year." I blinked at the screen like I had misheard him, wondering if that meant what I thought it did. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe he was trying to spare me a long flight or assuming I was buried in work. I told him I could make it work, that I'd help mom prep the meal like always, that I missed everyone. Then there was silence, long enough for me to hear the faint hum of the television in their living room and the clink of dishes in the background. That's when he cleared his throat and said, without an ounce of hesitation, "Derek is bringing his girlfriend to meet the family. She's accomplished, Travis. She's got a director role at a firm in Chicago. And, well, if you're around, it might complicate things." At that moment, it felt like something sharp had sliced through the center of my chest. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the delivery, the calm certainty in his voice like he'd rehearsed it. He told me my presence would distract from Derek's big introduction, that I might tarnish the impression on Melissa and her parents. Then he said it straight, without flinching, "It's better for all of us if you sit this one out." I remember staring at my desk, papers scattered, screens glowing, all of it fading into the background as that sentence repeated over and over in my head. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision made without me, announced like a memo. I didn't argue, didn't beg for an invitation, didn't try to explain that I wasn't some invisible loser playing with laptops in a basement. I ended the call and sat in silence, wondering how the people I'd quietly supported for years could still see me as a failure. What my parents didn't know, what they never cared enough to ask, was that I'd built a cybersecurity firm from scratch. Our Crest Systems had gone from 3 guys in a leaky warehouse to 110 employees across 2 offices, with plans to expand into Atlanta. Last year, we crossed $1.4 million in revenue. Not venture capital, not inheritance, just long days, no sleep, and a decade of grit they never saw. But to them, Derek, the salesman with a cubicle and a nice suit, was the definition of success. He sent them a new smart TV once, and they acted like he'd cured cancer. When I got into a tech accelerator and closed my first real contract, they accused me of faking the numbers. I was the computer guy, a nickname they never dropped, even when I bought my apartment outright in cash. That phone call broke something in me. Not out of shock, but because deep down I already knew they'd never change. I had paid their utility bills during Dad's rehab, covered property taxes during the winter they both lost their jobs, and sent $1,000 monthly for over 3 years without asking for anything in return. Not even a thank you. Just silence or occasional updates on how Derek had really found his rhythm. When I stopped to think about it, I realized I'd been trying to earn their pride the way you chase a ghost in a house you don't live in anymore. That night, I opened my banking app and canceled the automatic transfer. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel this scheduled payment?" I hit yes before I could hesitate, exhaled, and stared at the screen for a long time. Christmas morning, I volunteered at a shelter downtown. Instead of pretending to fit in with people who saw me as a blemish on the family photo, I spent the day serving hot meals to people who didn't know my name but looked me in the eye with gratitude. The moment was heavy and real. I felt human again. That night, back at my place, I scrolled through social media and landed on a picture my cousin had posted. Everyone was there: mom, dad, Derek with Melissa, uncles and aunts all smiling under string lights around the dinner table. No empty seat for me. No missing plate. Just a family that moved on without blinking. My absence wasn't just unnoticed. It was intentional. I stared at the image, then closed the app and set the phone down beside my untouched coffee. I wasn't surprised when, 3 days later, my mom texted, "Sweetheart, I think something's wrong with the account. Can you check it?" I stared at it, then put my phone face down on the couch. There was no question about my well-being, no mention of Christmas or where I spent it, just the money. The next day, my dad called 4 times in a row, leaving a voicemail that sounded more like a threat than concern. "What's going on? Why didn't you send the payment? Call me back now." I didn't call. I texted back a single sentence: "I canceled the payment." That was it. I turned off my phone and didn't check again until morning. 40 missed calls. 11 new voicemails. I deleted them all without pressing play. That week, I got a call from Aunt Lynette, my mom's sister, the same woman who used to bake me chocolate chip cookies when I was 10, the one who hadn't spoken to me in years but now suddenly had a lot to say. "Travis, your mom came over yesterday in tears. She said she doesn't know why you've turned so cold." I tried to explain that I had my reasons, that things weren't what she thought. She cut me off. "She says you stopped helping them out of jealousy. You're bitter because Derek is doing well." I wanted to laugh, but the weight in my throat made it impossible. "Auntie, I've been sending them money for years. Every month. Without fail." She paused. "They told me it was just a little help, 200 here and there." The air drained out of my lungs. 200? She said it like it was a generous estimate. I hung up without finishing my sentence, the weight of betrayal sharper than anything I had felt before. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning like a broken clock and replayed every moment of being overlooked, ignored, diminished. It wasn't about a job title or how many people I employed. It was the fact that my family had never seen me. Not really. And when they had a chance to include me, they chose silence. When they could have said, "Travis is doing well," they said nothing. When they could have stood up for me, they turned away. The next day, I drove to Lynette's house, documents in hand, and showed her everything. Every transfer, every message, every receipt. Her eyes widened as she scrolled. "You sent this much?" I nodded once. "They said you were angry. They said you gave up on them." I kept my voice even. "No. I just stopped letting them lie about who I am." She asked to take screenshots. I said yes. Before I left, she looked me in the eye and said, "I'll make sure they hear the truth this time." I believed her. But I wasn't waiting for redemption. I was done waiting for anything. The morning after Aunt Lynette sent the family group message, I woke to silence. Not a single call or text. No dramatic voicemails. Just a cold, empty quiet from people who'd once blown up my phone over missed birthdays or late payments. For the first time in years, it was peaceful. I poured coffee, sat by the window, and let the weight roll off my shoulders like I had finally stopped carrying something that was never mine to begin with. But I knew it wouldn't last. The silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. They were regrouping, trying to decide how to spin the truth now that the mask had slipped. At noon, I got a message from Derek. It started casual, like we hadn't gone a full year barely speaking. "Hey, man. Hope you're doing all right." That was it. No apology. No mention of the photos Lynette had shared. Just a tone like we were catching up after a long vacation. I didn't reply. That night, I saw a new name appear in our hiring queue. Ironcrest was launching its Atlanta office, and I'd instructed HR to start screening for a branch sales manager. When I scrolled through the shortlisted candidates, I nearly dropped my tablet. Derek. No last name needed. Same resume he used years ago, now with a few strategic upgrades. He had applied without realizing who ran the company. He must have assumed it was just another firm with a generic brand name and a modern website. Linda, our head of HR, knocked on my office door and handed me the applicant stack. "We've got 10 left in the final round. Strong credentials overall, but a few questionable inflations in here." She paused, glancing at Derek's file. "This one says he led a national sales team, but the numbers don't line up with his prior company's size." I nodded slowly, already making my decision. "I'll handle this one myself. No panel. Just me." Her eyebrows lifted, but she said nothing. I rarely got directly involved in mid-level hiring anymore. She knew something was up but respected my space enough not to ask. Tuesday afternoon, 2 p.m. sharp. Derek walked into the downtown Charlotte office dressed like he was heading to a wedding. Tailored blazer, polished shoes, too much cologne. He shook hands with Linda and Jake, the Atlanta team lead, smiling like he owned the room. Then I stepped in from the side door. His smile froze like he'd just seen a ghost. The silence lasted exactly 8 seconds before he finally muttered, "Travis? Wait, you're the founder." I nodded once, pulled out a chair, and sat across from him. "Let's begin." For the next 45 minutes, I asked every question I'd give any candidate. Except this time, I already knew the answers wouldn't hold. Derek struggled through every one. When Linda asked about quarterly growth targets from his last position, he hesitated, then gave a vague estimate that didn't match his resume. Jake pressed him on team structure, asking how he'd handled low performers. Derek gave a long-winded answer that said absolutely nothing. It became painfully clear he had never led a team, never handled real revenue accountability, and had padded his entire profile hoping no one would dig deeper. Finally, I leaned forward and asked the one question I had saved for the end. Derek, are you aware we have strict conflict of interest policies regarding family hires? He blinked twice, shifted in his seat, then nodded weakly. Yeah, I get it. But I mean, maybe the rules would be different for, I cut him off. For who? You? Or me? His mouth opened, then closed. He said nothing. Linda wrapped the interview up with a polite nod and said we'd be in touch. 2 days later, Linda sent the rejection email. Short, direct, and professional. No one mentioned my connection to him. He was treated like any other unqualified applicant. That night, my phone lit up like a fire alarm. First from Derek, then from Mom, then Dad. The texts came in waves, each one louder than the last. You embarrassed your brother. You could have helped him. You think you're too good for your own blood now. Then came Derek's message. I needed that job. You're the reason I'm stuck. I read every word, let the anger wash over me, then deleted all of it without replying. The next morning, Linda came into my office looking unsettled. Travis, your father called our front desk. Asked to speak to you directly. Said it's urgent. I didn't flinch. Tell him Ironcrest doesn't discuss internal decisions with non-employees. And we definitely don't take hiring recommendations from family. Linda nodded, but I could see the questions building behind her eyes. I didn't know her an explanation, but I gave her one anyway. That applicant misrepresented himself. He wasn't qualified. That's the only thing that matters. She held my gaze for a second longer, then said, understood, and walked out. I didn't know what reaction I expected, but I didn't expect them at my door 3 days later. My parents, standing outside my apartment building in their winter coats like they were just dropping by for a friendly visit. They didn't call ahead, didn't text, just showed up, hoping I'd open the door like nothing had happened. I hesitated, but then I opened it. Not because I wanted to see them, but because I didn't want the neighbors overhearing what I knew would come next. They sat on the edge of the couch, eyes darting around the room like they were trying to find something wrong with my success. I poured water neither of them touched. My dad spoke first, voice carefully measured. We need to talk about Derek. My mother jumped in immediately. He's hurting, Travis. All he needed was a foot in the door. I waited, arms crossed, heart racing. I had seen this performance too many times before. This wasn't a plea, it was pressure. My dad leaned forward. You run this company. You could have just given him the job. Family helps family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the bitterness spill. I just said, Derek applied. He was interviewed. He didn't qualify. My mother's voice softened, like she was trying to pull on some invisible string from childhood. He's your brother. All he needed was a chance. I looked at the two people who had pushed me out of their Christmas picture and were now demanding access to the world I had built without their help. You told me not to come home. You said I'd embarrass you. That's what I remember. Not one thank you for the years I supported you. Not a single word about the business I've poured my life into. My father's tone snapped. This is about ego. You think money makes you better than us. My mother's expression turned sharp. You've changed. You used to be kind. Now you're cold and selfish. And then came the line I knew was coming. The threat wrapped in desperation. If you don't fix this, we'll tell everyone what kind of son you are. That's when I stood up, calm and unshaken. I walked to my bedroom, picked up my phone, and dialed. Yes, I need assistance. 2 individuals are refusing to leave my residence after repeated requests. I gave them my address, then returned to the living room. My parents stared at me like I'd grown horns. My mother whispered, You called the police on your own family? I said nothing. 10 minutes later, 2 officers knocked. They were professional, respectful, and clearly used to situations like this. After hearing both sides, one of them pulled me aside. You can file a restraining order if this continues. I nodded. I was already halfway there. My parents left with nothing more to say. My father muttered something about regret. My mother wiped her eyes, but the tears felt hollow. Performative. Practiced. I closed the door behind them without looking back. 3 days later, I filed the paperwork. The judge approved a temporary restraining order within hours. I attached the voicemails, the messages, and the record of their visit. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about finally choosing peace over guilt. Letting go of the belief that I owed something just because we shared blood. Letting the truth speak louder than the lies I'd been living under for 30 years. For the first time, I felt like I had finally reclaimed the air in my own lungs. 3 weeks after the restraining order was filed, the silence returned, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean, almost freeing, like a door had finally slammed shut and the soundproofing held. I focused on the business. Ironcrest was ahead of schedule on the Atlanta branch build-out, and I threw myself into the work like a man with something to prove, even though I no longer felt like I needed to prove it to anyone. We were onboarding our new hires, securing a second government contract, and finalizing a partnership with a tech firm in Miami. For the first time in a decade, I could feel momentum without friction. Everything moved forward. No dragging baggage, no emotional sabotage, no pretending to be someone I wasn't just to maintain the illusion of a happy family. Then, without warning, my past tried to claw its way back through an unexpected message. It wasn't from my parents or Derek this time. It was from someone I never expected to hear from again, Melissa. I opened the email thinking it was some random networking outreach. But her name stopped me cold. The subject line read simply, "About everything." I clicked, heart thudding for no good reason, and began to read. Her tone wasn't apologetic. It was cautious, measured. She explained she'd found out everything after the holidays, that she'd had no idea I was blacklisted from Christmas or that the family had purposely excluded me to keep appearances clean. She said she didn't agree with it, but she hadn't known how deep it went until Derek tried to get her to talk to me about the job offer after his rejection. Apparently, Derek had tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, that I was bitter and impulsive, that I'd sabotaged him because of old sibling rivalry. Melissa, according to her email, didn't believe that story after digging into what really happened. She said she stumbled onto Aunt Lynette's post in the extended family group thread. She read the message I sent to my parents. She saw the receipts, the years of payments. She saw the voicemail transcription where my dad said I would embarrass them. "You didn't deserve that," she wrote. "None of it. And I think you should know. I left Derek. We broke up a month ago." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't know what emotion I expected to feel, but I didn't feel much of anything. Not relief, not satisfaction. Just tired. She said she wasn't reaching out for forgiveness or reconciliation, only to acknowledge what happened. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Whatever healing she needed wasn't my burden to carry. I archived the email, closed my laptop, and went for a walk. A few days later, I stood at the front of our new Atlanta office, giving the welcome speech to the 25 new employees we'd hired in just under 2 months. As I looked at the fresh faces in the room, I felt something settle in me. I was building something that mattered, not just a company, but a culture. One that didn't rely on bloodlines or borrowed pride, where no one got a title because of last names or family connections. Here, people earned their place. They rose because of what they built, not because someone pulled strings behind the curtain. I'd learned the hard way that family wasn't about biology. It was about respect. And when respect was gone, all that remained was noise. The next big wave came without warning. Ironcrest got featured in a major tech magazine, highlighting our cybersecurity infrastructure, especially the work we'd done for municipal governments in the Southeast. Overnight, the exposure tripled our leads, and my inbox became a war zone of interest from investors, recruiters, and yes, family members I hadn't heard from in years. A cousin from Louisiana suddenly wanted to catch up. An uncle from Denver congratulated me, followed up by asking if I could take a look at his son's resume. One of my mother's oldest friends emailed asking if her nephew could get a job shadow. None of them asked how I was. None asked about the road it took to get there. They just wanted access now that there was proof I had something to offer. I ignored them all. My phone buzzed so often I had to put it on silent during work hours. One night, while reviewing quarterly reports, I got a message from Derek. This time it wasn't begging or posturing. It was cold, calculated. "Hope you're proud. You got what you wanted. Congrats on your little empire." I stared at it, then typed one line and returned before deleting it. There was no point in replying. He didn't want closure. He wanted me to lose my temper, to fall into the trap of defending myself again. But I had learned. You don't owe explanations to people who only hear you when they need something. Instead, I started pouring energy into something new, something that didn't revolve around damage control. I launched a mentoring program through Ironcrest's nonprofit division, focused on supporting young founders who came from unstable family dynamics. I'd been through it. I knew the traps. I knew how easy it was to feel like your dreams had to be approved by the very people who doubted you. We offered free workshops on business structuring, seed funding, and emotional boundary setting. One of our first mints was a kid named Julian, 19, who'd built a password management app out of his garage while sleeping in his spare room. I saw the same fire in his eyes that I'd once seen in my own, before it was dulled by doubt and betrayal. I told him something I wish someone had said to me years ago. You don't need their permission to become who you are. About 6 weeks after Melissa's email, another surprise came knocking. This time, it wasn't metaphorical. A letter arrived, an actual handwritten letter in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single folded sheet with cursive handwriting. It was from my mother. She said she heard about the article, had seen the photos from our Atlanta office opening. She wrote that she had been overwhelmed with emotion, that it made her proud and sad at the same time. She mentioned that they were struggling financially, emotionally, spiritually. She didn't ask for money directly, but it was there between the lines. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the restraining order or the message that started all of this. She just wrote, "We miss you. Come home." I folded the letter once, slid it into a drawer, and went back to work. I didn't respond. There was no answer to give. The only thing I could offer them now is distance. My peace wasn't something I was going to trade for sentimentality or guilt. I had worked too hard to rebuild myself from the inside out. I didn't need closure. I didn't need reconciliation. I needed consistency, self-respect, and a quiet mind. Weeks turned into months. Ironcrest reached 180 employees. We added a West Coast partnership. I traveled to a tech conference in Denver, gave a talk on resilience and leadership, and afterward, a woman approached me with a firm handshake and a quiet smile. Her name was Harper, a creative director for a branding firm in Austin. We started working on a campaign together, and then we started texting outside of work. Our first date wasn't romantic or flashy. We grabbed dinner at a small seafood spot and talked for hours about family, ambition, survival, and what it means to outgrow your past. Harper didn't flinch when I told her about the restraining order or the fallout. She said, "Sometimes the strongest love is the one that walks away when it has to." I knew then she understood something most people never would. We weren't rescuing each other. We were just seeing one another clearly, flaws and all. For the first time in my life, I was with someone who valued the man I'd become, not the boy my parents never stopped misjudging. The past didn't vanish, but it faded. It stopped dictating my pace. I learned to build without dragging the chains. I stopped waiting for the applause that was never coming. I wrote my own definition of family, and nowhere in it was the word obligation. 5 months after the last letter, the silence I'd worked so hard to protect cracked open again, this time from an unexpected direction. One of our senior engineers, Alexis, flagged a comment thread that had exploded overnight on a local tech forum. Someone claiming to be a disenfranchised relative of Ironcrest's founder had posted a rambling message accusing me of betraying family, stealing ideas, and using dirty money to climb the ranks. It didn't name me outright, but it didn't need to. The details were unmistakable. It was my brother's writing style, petty, inflated, and full of just enough truth to make it dangerous. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to our legal department and moved on with my morning, but something deep in my gut twisted tight. I knew this wouldn't end with an anonymous forum post. It was just the beginning. Sure enough, that Friday, Harper and I were getting dinner when I got a call from an unrecognized number. I ignored it. Then another. Then a text. "You think you can ignore us forever? You'll regret this." I showed it to Harper without saying a word. She read it, put her hand on mine, and simply said, "Whatever you do next, do it on your terms." That stuck with me. Because I knew what was coming, I just hadn't decided how to handle it yet. 3 days later, I arrived at the Charlotte office early to prep for a quarterly review. Security was already in the lobby, standing near the glass entrance with uneasy expressions. The front desk clerk waved me over and lowered her voice. Two individuals tried to enter the building 20 minutes ago. No appointment. Claimed they were family. My chest tightened. What happened? She pointed toward the lobby cameras. I glanced at the footage and saw them, my parents, both standing there like they belonged, like they were owed something. My father had a folder in his hand. My mother looked directly at the camera like she knew I'd be watching. They hadn't spoken to me in months, hadn't responded to the restraining order. But now, apparently, they were showing up at my workplace in broad daylight, bypassing every boundary I had set. I instructed security to file an incident report and made it clear that if they returned, police would be called again. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, trying to figure out what their endgame was. They had already lost the money. They had already lost access. The only thing left was the illusion of power, and they were trying to get it back through embarrassment, pressure, spectacle. That's when I made a decision I hadn't seriously considered until now. I called my attorney and started the paperwork to convert the temporary restraining order into a permanent one. He warned me it might create more noise. I told him I didn't care. They were trespassing emotionally, psychologically, and now physically. The cost of peace was worth every piece of paperwork. The fallout came fast. That weekend, an anonymous email was sent to half my senior staff claiming I had lied about my family background, manipulated company funds, and abandoned loved ones during illness and poverty. It was full of exaggerations and twisted half-truths. One paragraph even implied that Ironcrest seed funding had come from illegal sources, a claim that was not only false, but laughably easy to disprove. Still, I had our PR team draft a response, and our legal team track the IP address. Within 48 hours, we had confirmation it originated from a public library terminal 2 blocks from my parents' apartment. I could have gone public. I could have sent a firm-wide email exposing everything: timeline, documents, abuse, theft. But instead, I called a company-wide town hall and addressed it with careful clarity. We've seen a few rumors circulating. Rest assured, our financial records, audits, and legal history are completely clean. We've dealt with internal noise before, and we'll deal with this the same way, with professionalism and transparency. If you have questions, my door is open. No one asked. They trusted me, not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. Every day, through consistency, through integrity, through building a company where people came first. Later that week, Harper asked me something I wasn't expecting. Do you think they're done now? I thought about it for a long time before answering. No, but I'm done giving them the satisfaction of being shocked. Because the truth was, people like my parents never stopped. They escalated. They mutated. They dressed the same manipulation in new clothing until you either broke or stopped reacting. I had learned to stop reacting. What I hadn't expected, what blindsided me, was how fast things unraveled for them without my support propping everything up. My cousin Brielle, who lived a few streets away from them, called me one night out of the blue. I don't want to get involved, but your parents, they're not doing well. I stayed quiet. She went on. Their landlord filed an eviction notice. Your dad's been trying to get loans. Your mom's calling every relative she can think of. I asked her, why are you telling me? She sighed. Because they're telling people it's your fault, that you ruined them. I hung up, not angrily, just quietly. It was the final confirmation I needed, that no matter what happened, they would never take responsibility. The story would always change to fit the victim mask. I would always be the villain in the version they needed others to believe. A few days after Brielle's call, Harper and I were walking through a bookstore when my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I played it back. It was my father's voice, raspy, slow, tired. I know you hate us. I know you think we deserved everything. Maybe we did. But your mother's health is worse now. The hospital bills, he trailed off. I stopped listening. I deleted it. Because at the end of the day, what they still hadn't learned was that manipulation cloaked in guilt was still manipulation. I had made my peace. I had made my choice. And every desperate, last-ditch attempt to squeeze empathy out of old wounds only reminded me why I had chosen distance in the first place. Love isn't supposed to feel like leverage. Family isn't supposed to be a transaction. That night, Harper and I talked for hours. Not about what happened, but about what we were building. About future plans, about creating a home that didn't echo with shame. We talked about boundaries and what it meant to love someone without expecting them to rescue you from your own failures. For once, I didn't feel like I had to explain my choices. I didn't feel judged for being distant. I felt respected for holding the line, for protecting my peace, for walking away from people who confused control with love. Weeks passed. The company kept growing. My name was floated as a keynote speaker for a national tech summit. Our nonprofit hit funding targets 6 months ahead of schedule. And through it all, I kept the door to my past locked. Not out of spite, not out of fear, but because I had finally learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is not return to the fire just because someone else decided to light it again. I hadn't burned the bridge. I'd simply stopped rebuilding it every time they kicked out a support beam. And this time, for good, I let the bridge collapse. 6 months after the last voicemail, the story finally reached its natural conclusion. Not with a fight, not with another letter, but with something far quieter. Closure didn't come in a dramatic confrontation or some unexpected apology from the people who had spent years tearing me down. It came on a random Tuesday afternoon, as I sat on the back patio of our new place just outside Asheville, watching Harper sketch ideas for her next campaign while our dog snored at her feet. The world didn't stop to congratulate me for surviving. There was no sudden realization from my family. But I had something better, a life that finally felt like it belonged to me, unfiltered and fully mine. One morning, I received a text from Aunt Lynette, just a single line, no context. They're moving to stay with Derek. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it without replying. Maybe they were finally facing consequences. Maybe they still believed I was the villain. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. I hadn't spoken to them in nearly a year, and not once did I feel the need to hear their voices again. Whatever story they told themselves to sleep at night, I had no place in it. The nonprofit continued to grow, and we launched a summer workshop for first-generation founders navigating toxic family pressure. I shared my story not for pity, but to remind others that survival isn't shameful, and setting boundaries doesn't mean you lack compassion, it means you have courage. One of our participants, a young woman named Kiera, pulled me aside after the last session and said, "Thank you for showing us we're not broken just because we chose peace." I smiled, nodded, and realized that somewhere along the way, I had become the person I once needed to meet. Harper and I didn't rush things, but when we finally decided to get engaged, there was no drama, no pressure to impress relatives, no guilt about who to invite. We booked a small cabin for close friends, exchanged vows beneath an old oak tree, and ended the night with firewood crackling and laughter echoing across the hills. It was simple, quiet, and perfect, proof that joy doesn't need an audience, and healing doesn't always need recognition to be real. Not long ago, I found an old notebook from the early days of Ironcrest, tucked inside a box I hadn't opened in years. Flipping through the pages, I saw rough sketches of business plans, late-night strategy notes, and one sentence I'd written on the inside cover. Someday, this will all make sense. Back then, I wrote it with hope. Now, I read it with certainty. Because it did. Every insult, every rejection, every ignored call, it all shaped the version of me that finally stopped shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. If you've made it this far, and you've ever been made to feel like your worth is conditional on success, on silence, on obedience, I want you to know this. You do not owe anyone access to your peace. You are not ungrateful for protecting yourself. And walking away doesn't make you weak. It means you finally realized you're strong enough to choose yourself. I didn't lose a family. I lost a prison. And in its place, I built a home.